Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're talking about drill bits. Yeah, a whole bunch of them. We're going to figure out how to sharpen these things. Let's dive in. One of the big differences between a power tool woodworker and a hand tool woodworker is that a hand tool woodworker, when something gets dull, they sharpen it. Today specifically, I want to look at these 5 different types of bits. Number 1, the Spade bit, the Forstner bit, the Wood Owl 3-flute, the simple twist bit, and of course we're going to start with the traditional auger. As with every single tool in the shop, sharpness is just 2 faces of metal coming down until they make a point. The basic humble chisel is a great explanation of it in that you have 2 faces of metal that come to a tight point. This one's pretty obvious in that you would sharpen this face and sometimes you sharpen this one, and once you bring those 2 planes together, you're left with a sharp point. It's the exact same thing with an auger bit, except for the planes that you're bringing them down together aren't all in one plane, they're in several different. So let's take a closer look. On an auger bit, there's 2 spots you need to sharpen. Number 1, the spur or nicker on the outside here. This is what actually determines the circle. And number 2, the actual cutting blade here. That's what removes the majority of the waste. Now when sharpening the auger, you do not want to sharpen the outside. That will actually change the diameter and will cause problems as the rest of the flutes go through. It can actually jam. Also, you don't generally want to sharpen the top side here because then you're going to be running into the nicker back here. Getting on this can sometimes cause you problems. So for an auger, you just want to touch the inside of the nicker and the underside of the main cutting surface. For this particular task, I'm going to use this. This is an auger file, and it has files on the faces, but not on the edge. And on the other end, it's got it on the edge, but not on the faces. This is what we call a safe face or a safe edge. It'll be safe as you're not going to be rubbing up against things. Some regular files will also work, as this one has a safe face on here. So if I need to file up against something, this face won't grind into it. It'll only grind on the side with the file mesh. So in this case, I'm going to take my auger file that has filing on the face, and I'm going to use that to hit the nicker on here. And I'm just kind of feeling the surface, and the only thing that's really important on this is the very tip of the nicker. That's what's actually going to be cutting the circle. So I don't need to worry about hitting the whole blade, as the only thing that's cutting is the very, very tip of that. So I'm just going to take 5 or 6 passes, and then I'm going to feel it to make sure I've got a little bit of a burr sticking up on the other side. Some people will come through and clean that burr off. I generally leave it alone, as the first pass through the wood will clean that right off for me. Then for the blade, I'm going to put it tipped down on my bench, lean it back a little bit until that blade edge is basically parallel with the bench or a little bit back. And then I can come in again with the file that has the face on it, and that way my safe side can run into the shank without cutting into it. I'm just going to match that bevel angle and then do a couple quick passes on here, doing the full width of that. And I can make sure I've got a little bit of a burr coming through it. That's all it needs, just that tiny bit. Now, if you do happen to get nicks and chips along the edge, you may have to do more of that to get back. Or you may need to do some on the front, but just be very, very careful with this because sometimes you're going to be running into other things up on top of here and changing where the cut actually happens. The 3-flute cutter from Wood Owl is one of my favorites. And the nickers on this one are the exact same. We just hit the outside of those. It does the very same thing on here. But the flutes underneath are actually rounded, so you can't come into this side unless you actually have a rounded file. So in this case, I actually do the top side, which means you have to be a little bit more careful. But because there's much, much smaller with far less mass than you're in the original auger bits, they actually sharpen pretty easily. I'm again use the same one on here. I'm going to put it right onto that bevel and just do the first little bit across here. And that's all it takes to get that little bit of a burr, nice sharp edge on there. Now, one thing I didn't talk too much about is the snail, this screw up in the front. If that isn't very good, the rest of this is not going to work. But if you find that this is clogging up a lot and you're getting a lot of gunk built up on here, it's usually because your blades aren't sharp. The auger can't pull a dull blade through the wood. So as long as you keep the blade sharp, the auger should work fine. But if the tip ever breaks off and needs a little work, you can come into the needle file and reshape that. You want this tip to be really nice and sharp. A good snail makes everything easier. But if it's spinning and filling up with dirt, most of the time it's not the snail, it's the blade that's the problem. Now let's move up a step in difficulty. This is the Spade bit. It's actually a little bit easier, but some people find it complicated as that it's just an interesting geometry. Now I don't use Spade bits that often, but they're a very cheap, affordable way to get into boring holes, and you can buy them anywhere for almost nothing. And you don't need a really good high quality one, it'll do the work, especially if a drill to push it in because it's not going to pull itself into the work. Now for the Spade bit, I usually like to put it in the vise, just have it stand up vertical, and then crank it down in so it's not going to be moving around on me. Now, most of the time, these are soft enough you can come into the file and you can do the work you need to. But every now and then you're going to come across one that's hardened. In that case, I would say, throw it out. A hardened spade bit can be a dangerous thing if pieces start breaking off. But most of the time they're soft enough, a file actually works really nicely. In this case, I'm just going to set the file on here, let it match the angle on the main cutting edge, and do the work. I'll have another hand come in here and hold the other side. From the side here, you can see on the front blade, I'm going at this angle, and on the back blade, I'm going to be going at that angle. I'm just feeling it and seeing where it needs a little work. In this case, it's got these tiny little knickers sticking up here, and so I'm going to grab the file that has the file on the edge and safe faces, and I'm just going to make this match that angle and cut it. It doesn't take much until you get this nice little burr sticking up here. And last we need to do the third face, which is actually on, the point here. I'm going to be using the side of the file that has filing on the face. And just a few light passes on this side, and a few light passes on this side. And we're good. Now, sometimes it can be hard to see what you've filed and what you haven't. So if you come in with a Sharpie and you do up the edge, now you can easily see if you're off of an angle. So I'm going to come at this one at a wrong angle, and I'm going to file here, and here you can see I just took it off of this back side here, and that lets me know my angle is off. I need to adjust so I'm hitting the full face of the file. When it all comes off in a single pass, you know you have your file on the right angle. So what about Forstner bits, these weird things? One of the problems with Forstner bits is most of the time they're very hard, and so you don't generally want to do them with a file. A simple diamond paddle like this one from DiaSharp DMT. This will actually come in here and do it relatively nicely. But thankfully this set is cheap enough that it's actually relatively soft and I can still do it with a file. As with the auger bits, there's a main cutting surface, and then on the outside you have all of these knickers or spurs that are going to actually cut the circumference. The main blades are what remove most material. And in this case, it's much easier to do the large flat surface. Even though it is a large flat surface, it's very easy to register your file on that surface and make sure you're getting the right angle on there. The difficult part are all of these knickers around the outside. These ones, you need to do the back of each one, and that can get very tedious to hit every single one of these on the back. And then I need to come through and hit all of them on the front of the tooth, just like on a rip cut tooth. And then there's another inside bevel you got to hit as well to bring that to a sharp point. And they can be very fiddly and difficult to get all of these little things to the same point so that they're all cutting. And that's one of the reasons why I don't generally mess with Forstner bits that much. Not to mention they're really difficult to do with hand tools. You can use them with a drill, but you have to be very careful they don't bounce around, because that center point, it's not a snail that pulls it through the wood. You've got to put in all the force, and you also got to make sure it doesn't shift around, and that center point is a difficult thing to balance on. So if you're using a drill press, they're phenomenal, but for handwork, I don't use them that much. But what about simple twist bits? Aren't those one of the hardest to sharpen? I think the big problem with them is the geometry on them is a little bit fiddly, and wrapping your brain around exactly what do you need to sharpen on this can be a bit challenging. But let me kind of dumb it down and simplify it a bit. Now, first and foremost, these are usually very hard, and you do need a diamond paddle or something similar to cut them. Don't try and use your files on them, you're just gonna end up destroying the files. And the weird thing about this is there's no spur or nicker on the outside, it's just the simple cutting face. You're not gonna be able to cut from underneath, you're just gonna be cutting the top cutting face. And the nice thing is, it's just a single flat surface. So in this case, I'm just going to match the diamond paddle to the cutting surface and grind it down. Now I've got here my diamond plate. I'm going to bring my camera down level with it. And if I bring my bit in and set it on here so it's perfectly vertical, I'm going to lean it towards the camera until the cutting blade touches the surface. So it looks vertical to the camera, but if I turned it 90 degrees, it would actually be leaning at this cutting angle. And the important thing is you don't want it to be cutting here. You can see as a relief, we want to actually lean it back to about this angle. Because if we cut it vertical, it would be like having a 45-degree bevel on a 45-degree bed plane. We actually want to have a relief angle to it, so we need to bring it back a little bit. Let me show you that again at a different angle here. Rather than keeping it vertical, we want to have that cutting edge in line with the camera. I want to lean it back, and then we're going to tip it back at a slight angle. And that is the bevel angle at which it needs to be. And as long as you are actually leaning it a little bit, it's going to cut. If it's vertical, then you're going to have a problem because nothing's going to be biting into it. You need about 5 to 10 degrees on here, and different tools for different things are going to require a different cutting angle. But for wood, it really doesn't matter that much. So what I can do is take my Sharpie and load up the surface, and that will let me know where I'm cutting. And then I'm going to put it on here. Again, have it come into the plate vertical, lay it down until it's on that cutting edge, and then lean it back just a little bit, and I'm going to hold it kind of like a pencil. And just run along the plate, 1, 2, 3, and then I can check my surface on here. And in this case, you can see I didn't go all the way back along that bevel because that bevel was rounded by the previous machine. I just need to be touching the cutting edge, and every time I sharpen it, it's going to go back a little farther and a little farther, keeping it flat. But as long as I get a nice clean surface there, that's all it needs. I'm going to test it for sharp, and that's all this one needed. But if it needed a little more, I'd bring my Sharpie in here again, hit it one more time, do the same thing again. Put it in vertical, lean it back onto that cutting edge, put in a relief cut, then like a pencil, drag it along the diamond plate. And again, you can see how that came out. Nice good sharp edge there. And like that, we can take it over the test board and see what you got. I want to see these wood curls coming out of there from each pass. And it's not going to give you quite as good a clean entry hole without that necker running around, but it should cut relatively quickly. Ta-da! And if you look down at the dust pile here, you're actually going to see these curls, almost like cone shapes. That's what you're looking for. You can sharpen them in the vise, just like the others, but I find this to be a little more inaccurate in that it just bounces around a bit more on your finger. I personally prefer to do them on the diamond plate, just like holding a pencil, and then let my fingers slide around on my knuckle back here, and just use that as a natural guide. And it doesn't take much at all to get a nice, clean, sharp cutting edge on there. And as with any skill, you're not going to get it right on your first try. It's going to need a little bit of work, and it's going to take a bit of practice. So grab a trash one that you can find and give it a little bit of try. And you might get surprised that, on your first try, it's probably going to be functional. But every time you do it, you're going to get a little bit better and a little bit better. You're going to get a cleaner surface, and your blades are going to be cutting easier and simpler. And you're not going to be clogging them up and jamming them and wondering why are they just spinning in the cut rather than pulling themselves through. Why aren't they giving you a nice clean entry hole every time? If you sharpen it, a lot of those problems will be fixed. And as with anything with tools, if you sharpen it, it fixes 99% of the problems. So it doesn't matter what type of bit you use, they can all be sharpened. Whether it's a simple twist bit that you put in your drill or a really high-end fun auger bit that gives you precise holes, they all need to be sharpened. So it's a skill worth learning. And if you have any other questions, thoughts, ideas, snide remarks, or just want to tell me I did something wrong, please let me know down in the comments down below. I do enjoy that, and anytime someone tells me they're wrong, thank you. It actually helps out this channel. As with anyone who likes, comment, share, subscribe, and hit those things down there, you are really helping me out. So thank you. It means a lot. But if you really want to go farther, all of those names scrolling over here, those are some of the patrons on Patreon. And between patrons and members, you guys support this channel. We are completely sponsored by you. I don't have any sponsorship spots that pop up that I have to talk about because I want to say what I want to say and talk about the things that I want to talk about, and rather than what some company wants me to talk about. So I hope you like that. If you want to find out more about that, think about becoming a patron on Patreon or clicking the thank you button down below. It really means a lot. And I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. This was not a boring video. Well, except for that little bit with the demon-possessed tools. It was actually a rather sharp video. There wasn't a dull moment in it, except for right at the beginning before I did the sharpening part. My wife keeps telling me I shouldn't do these jokes at the end of the video, but I really think I auger do it.